There comes a quiet moment in every life when the soul grows tired, not because it is weak, but because it has spent too many years carrying burdens it never chose. Some of us inherit silence before we learn to speak. Some inherit fear before we discover hope. We carry old disappointments stitched into our hearts by people who could not heal themselves. We wear guilt that was placed on our shoulders long before we understood its weight. We confuse survival with living, endurance with joy, and sacrifice with love. Yet there is a truth waiting patiently beneath all that heaviness. Not everything you carry belongs to you. Imagine how different your life would feel if you laid down every judgment that was spoken over you, every expectation that demanded you become someone else, every wound that another person's brokenness pressed into your spirit. How much lighter would your heart become? How much clearer would your voice sound? How much farther could you walk if you stopped dragging chains that were forged in someone else's pain? Healing does not arrive because time passes. Time can preserve pain just as easily as it softens it. Healing begins when you decide that another person's fear will no longer become your future. It begins when you recognize that love should never require the abandonment of yourself. It begins when you understand that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. The greatest prison is often invisible, built from stories that convinced you that your worth depended on fixing everyone except yourself. The world has taught many people to carry what should have been shared, to apologize for wounds they did not create, and to believe that suffering is proof of goodness. But your spirit was never designed to become a storage place for the grief, anger, disappointment, and failures of others. You were created to breathe freely, to grow honestly, to love deeply without disappearing inside someone else's shadows. Today is not about forgetting what happened. It is about remembering who you were before the weight found you. It is about discovering that beneath every scar still lives a person worthy of peace, worthy of joy, and worthy of a future untouched by burdens that were never theirs to carry. The journey begins the moment you choose yourself, not against the world, but finally alongside the truth that your heart deserves freedom just as much as anyone else's. The first step toward genuine healing is learning to recognize the difference between the wounds life naturally gives you and the pain that other people quietly place upon your shoulders. This distinction is not always obvious. Many people spend years believing that every burden they carry is theirs by responsibility, when in reality, much of it was inherited through family expectations, unhealthy relationships, cultural pressures, or the unresolved struggles of those around them. As children, we absorb more than words. We absorb fear, silence, shame, anger, and insecurity. We learn to interpret another person's disappointment as evidence that we have failed. We begin carrying emotional weight before we are even old enough to understand its source. Over time, that borrowed pain becomes so familiar that it feels like part of our identity. Someone else's bitterness can teach you to distrust kindness. Someone else's fear can convince you that the world is too dangerous for your dreams. A parent's regret may become your hesitation. A friend's betrayal may become your inability to trust. The criticism of a teacher, the rejection of a loved one, or the constant comparison forced upon you can slowly shape the way you see yourself. None of these experiences define your worth, yet they often become the invisible voices that guide your decisions. You begin limiting yourself, apologizing for existing, shrinking your ambitions, or accepting treatment that diminishes your spirit because you believe that is simply who you are. The truth is that pain has a way of disguising itself as responsibility. You may feel obligated to fix everyone, to keep the peace at any cost, or to carry the emotional burdens of those you loved. You mistake sacrifice for love and exhaustion for loyalty. You convince yourself that if you can heal everyone else, perhaps your own wounds will disappear. But carrying another person's unresolved grief does not free them, and it certainly does not free you. Instead, it slowly drains your ability to recognize your own needs, dreams, and voice. There is great wisdom in asking a simple question whenever your heart feels unbearably heavy. Is this truly mine? That question creates space between your identity and the burdens you have accepted without permission. It reminds you that empathy does not require ownership. You can care deeply without becoming responsible for another person's choices. You can love someone without carrying the consequences of decisions they alone must face. Compassion should never require the abandonment of your own well-being. Recognizing borrowed pain also means challenging the stories you have repeated about yourself for years. Perhaps you believe you are not enough because someone once made you feel invisible. Perhaps you think your value depends on constant achievement, because approval was given only when you succeeded. Maybe you fear speaking your truth because honesty was once punished. These beliefs may feel deeply personal, but many of them were planted by circumstances beyond your control. They are learned responses, not permanent truths. Healing begins when you gently separate your authentic self from the burdens history handed to you. It requires honesty instead of denial, awareness instead of habit, and courage instead of comfort. As you begin releasing what never belonged to you, you discover that beneath the accumulated weight is a spirit that was never broken, only buried beneath expectations, disappointments, and inherited sorrow, waiting patiently to breathe with its own strength once again. Guilt, shame, and impossible expectations have a quiet way of becoming permanent residents in the heart when they are left unchallenged. They do not always arrive because of something you have done. Often they are handed to you by people who could not carry them themselves. Someone else's disappointment becomes your responsibility. Another person's anger becomes your silence. Their inability to love becomes your belief that you are difficult to love. Slowly, without noticing, you begin living a life shaped by emotional debts you never owed. Many people grow up believing they must earn acceptance by pleasing everyone around them. They become experts at reading moods, anticipating conflict, and sacrificing their own happiness to avoid upsetting others. Every decision becomes an attempt to meet expectations that continue to grow higher. If they succeed, the approval lasts only for a moment. If they fail, the guilt returns with greater force. This endless cycle convinces them that rest must be earned, joy must be justified, and self-worth depends entirely on performance. Yet no amount of perfection can satisfy expectations that were never reasonable in the first place. Shame is even more deceptive than guilt. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame whispers, I am the mistake. One invites growth, while the other steals identity. Shame convinces people that every rejection proves they are unworthy, every failure confirms they are incapable, and every criticism reveals a flaw that can never be repaired. It teaches them to hide their true selves behind masks of strength, success, or constant agreement. But hiding does not heal. It only postpones the moment when the heart asks to be seen as it truly is. There are also expectations that arrive quietly through family traditions, social norms, and unspoken rules. You may have been expected to become someone else's dream instead of discovering your own. Perhaps you were told to remain silent instead of expressing your thoughts, to stay small instead of becoming powerful, or to always put yourself last because that was considered kindness. These expectations may have been passed from one generation to another without anyone questioning whether they were healthy. People often pass down emotional burdens in the same way they pass down traditions, believing they are protecting those they love when they are actually limiting them. Releasing these weights does not mean rejecting the people who gave them to you. It means refusing to let their fears become the foundation of your future. It means recognizing that another person's opinion cannot define your value unless you give it permission. Their disappointment does not determine your destiny. Their misunderstanding does not erase your truth. Their limitations are not the boundaries of your potential. Freedom begins when you stop apologizing for becoming the person you were created to be. It begins when you realize that saying no to unhealthy expectations allows you to say yes to your own growth. You are not responsible for fulfilling every demand placed upon your life, nor must you spend your years proving that you deserve love, respect, or belonging. Those things are not rewards for endless sacrifice. They are part of your humanity as you begin releasing guilt that was manufactured by manipulation, shame that was rooted in someone else's judgment, and expectations designed to control rather than encourage. Your heart slowly rediscovers its natural rhythm. You begin making choices from conviction instead of fear, speaking from honesty instead of obligation, and living from purpose instead of performance, allowing your spirit to rise with a quiet confidence that no longer depends on carrying the emotional weight of others or measuring your worth against standards that were never yours to meet. For many people, the greatest loss is not the opportunities they missed or the dreams they postponed. It is the gradual disappearance of their own voice. It happens so quietly that they hardly notice. They begin speaking less about what they truly feel and more about what others expect to hear. They learn to agree instead of question, to remain silent instead of risk rejection, and to become smaller so that everyone else can remain comfortable. Piece by piece, they trade authenticity for acceptance, believing that belonging requires the sacrifice of identity. Yet, every time you silence your truth to protect someone else's comfort, a part of your spirit waits patiently to be heard again. Your voice is more than the sound that leaves your mouth. It is your perspective, your values, your boundaries, your dreams, and your ability to say, "This is who I am." When that voice is ignored for too long, life begins to feel unfamiliar. You may accomplish everything others expected of you and still feel empty because you have been living according to someone else's script. There is a profound difference between existing and truly living. Existence follows expectations. Living follows conviction. Reclaiming your identity begins with asking difficult but honest questions. What do you believe when no one else is telling you what to think? What brings you peace when applause is absent? What kind of life would you choose if fear no longer had the final word? These questions are not meant to create uncertainty, but to uncover the truth that has been buried beneath years of compromise. The answers may surprise you because they often reveal a version of yourself that has been waiting beneath layers of obligation and self-doubt. Many people mistake adaptation for identity. They become whatever the moment requires. Around one group they are quiet. Around another they are endlessly cheerful. In difficult relationships they suppress their opinions. In demanding environments they abandon their values just to fit in. While flexibility is a valuable strength, constantly changing yourself to gain approval eventually leaves you wondering who you really are. Identity cannot grow where authenticity is constantly negotiated. Inner peace also cannot survive in a life built entirely around external validation. If your happiness depends on being understood by everyone, you will spend your life chasing something that can never be fully achieved. People see the world through their own experiences, fears, and expectations. Some will misunderstand your intentions no matter how clearly you explain them. Others will criticize choices they were never asked to make. Peace arrives when you stop allowing every opinion to become a verdict on your worth. It grows when your confidence comes from integrity rather than applause. Reclaiming your voice also means setting boundaries without guilt. There will be moments when saying no feels uncomfortable because you have spent years believing your value depended on constant availability. Yet every healthy boundary is a declaration that your well-being matters. Boundaries do not push love away. They create the conditions where genuine love can exist without resentment, fear, or emotional exhaustion. They protect your energy so you can give from fullness instead of depletion. There is remarkable strength in speaking honestly, even when your voice trembles. Every truthful word weakens the hold that fear once had over your life. Every decision that reflects your values instead of someone else's expectations strengthens your sense of self. Every moment you choose authenticity over performance becomes evidence that you are no longer willing to disappear for the comfort of others. As your identity becomes rooted in self-respect rather than approval, your inner peace is no longer something you search for in distant places because it begins to grow from within, steady enough to remain even when the world around you refuses to understand your journey or your truth. Forgiveness is often misunderstood because people assume it means pretending that the pain never happened or excusing behavior that caused deep wounds. Many believe that forgiving someone is the same as giving them another opportunity to hurt them, forgetting the damage they caused, or accepting injustice without question. But true forgiveness is none of these things. Forgiveness is not permission for harmful behavior to continue. It is the decision to stop allowing that behavior to control your inner life. It is an act of freedom, not surrender. When someone hurts you, the event lasts for a moment, but the memory can remain for years. If left unattended, that memory grows into resentment, bitterness, and emotional exhaustion. The person who caused the wound may move on with their life, while you continue carrying the weight of what happened. In this way, unforgiveness becomes a second injury. The first wound came from another person's actions. The second comes from allowing that pain to occupy every corner of your heart. Healing begins when you recognize that your future should not remain imprisoned by your past. Holding on to anger often feels like a form of justice. It convinces you that remaining upset somehow balances the scales. Yet anger that is carried for too long rarely punishes the one who caused the harm. Instead, it slowly consumes the one who carries it. It steals peace from ordinary days, interrupts joyful moments with painful memories, and causes old wounds to shape new relationships. A heart that never releases its pain eventually struggles to make room for hope. Forgiveness does not erase accountability. Someone can still be responsible for the choices they made. Trust, once broken, may require time to rebuild or may never return at all. You can forgive someone and still choose distance. You can release resentment while maintaining healthy boundaries. You can wish someone healing without inviting them back into places where they repeatedly caused harm. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. Some relationships are restored through change and honesty, while others are honored best by ending them with wisdom and peace. Many people also struggle to forgive themselves. They replay old mistakes, relive moments they wish they could change, and carry regret as though it were a permanent identity. They believe one failure defines their entire character. Yet every human being has chapters they would rewrite if given the chance. Growth is not found in endlessly punishing yourself for yesterday. It is found in learning from yesterday while choosing differently today. Self-forgiveness is not denying responsibility. It is accepting responsibility without allowing shame to become your identity. There is remarkable strength in deciding that your heart deserves more than endless conflict. Forgiveness is not about declaring that what happened was acceptable. It is about declaring that what happened will no longer determine who you become. It is choosing peace over revenge, wisdom over bitterness, and hope over endless replaying of old wounds. This choice does not always happen in a single moment. Sometimes forgiveness is practiced day after day. Each time painful memories return, each decision to release resentment weakens its hold and strengthens your capacity to live fully. The journey of forgiveness also teaches compassion without sacrificing truth. It reminds you that broken people often wound others from places of their own unresolved pain, but understanding their struggles does not require carrying the consequences of their actions forever. You can acknowledge their humanity while protecting your own. You can recognize their flaws without allowing those flaws to shape the rest of your life. As forgiveness becomes a quiet act of liberation instead of reluctant permission, your heart gradually discovers that the greatest gift you were giving was never to the person who hurt you, but to yourself. Because freedom begins the moment you refuse to let yesterday continue writing tomorrow's story. Healing is often imagined as a destination, a moment when every scar disappears and every painful memory loses its power. But true healing is not a place you arrive at. It is a choice you make repeatedly. It is a quiet decision to honor your own life, even after it has been marked by disappointment, rejection, betrayal, or loss. Courage is not the absence of pain. Courage is waking up each day and refusing to let pain become the author of your future. It is choosing to believe that your story is still being written, even after chapters you never wanted to live through. Many people wait for the perfect moment to begin healing. They tell themselves they will move forward when they receive an apology, when justice is served, when someone finally understands what they endured, or when the memories no longer hurt. But if healing depends entirely on circumstances outside your control, your peace remains tied to people and events that may never change. The bravest choice is realizing that your freedom cannot be postponed until someone else decides to do the right thing. Your life is too valuable to remain paused while waiting for answers that may never come. Healing requires courage because it asks you to face truths that are often uncomfortable. It asks you to admit that some relationships cannot be repaired simply because you wish they could. It asks you to accept that some dreams ended, some people left, and some seasons of life cannot be recreated. Acceptance is not defeat. It is the moment you stop fighting reality and begin building a future from where you truly stand. Denial keeps you trapped in what was. Acceptance opens the door to what can still become. Self-respect grows from the decisions you make after pain, not before it. Every time you choose not to return to what repeatedly wounded you, you strengthen your sense of worth. Every time you refuse to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or emotional neglect, you remind yourself that your heart deserves kindness. The standards you set for your life become a reflection of how deeply you believe you matter. When you begin valuing yourself, you stop asking others to convince you that you are worthy. You no longer chase approval because you have discovered a deeper foundation within yourself. There will be moments when healing feels lonely. People who benefited from your silence may not celebrate your voice. Those who were comfortable with your endless giving may resist your boundaries. Some may even accuse you of changing, as though growth were something to apologize for. In truth, you are changing. You are becoming someone who no longer confuses self-sacrifice with love or emotional exhaustion with loyalty. That transformation may disappoint those who expected you to remain the same, but it will bring peace to the person you are becoming. Healing also teaches patience. A wounded heart rarely recovers overnight. Some days will feel lighter than others. There will be unexpected memories, familiar places, and old emotions that return without warning. These moments do not mean you have failed. They are reminders that healing is not measured by never feeling pain again, but by how differently you respond when pain visits. Instead of allowing it to define you, you acknowledge it, learn from it, and continue moving forward with greater wisdom than before. Choosing healing is one of the greatest acts of courage because it refuses to let suffering have the final word. It is an act of quiet rebellion against everything that tried to convince you that you would never recover. It is a declaration that your identity is greater than your wounds. Your future is larger than your past, and your spirit is stronger than every burden that once threatened to break it. When you choose healing with unwavering self-respect, you stop surviving from one painful memory to the next and begin living with a heart that is no longer chained to what happened, but strengthened by the courage to rise beyond it every single day.